And hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. I'm delighted to be here. Talking about creativity and collaboration and how to run creative workshops is certainly one of my passions. So I'm very happy to share it with you this morning. What I'd like to do today with you is mostly looking at how you might get a taste of how you might get to run a workshop that runs smoothly, playfully, and productively, and can turn to a creative event. And I think that's the difference here that I would like to talk about. It's just not running, anybody can run a workshop. That's what people, that's what I hear on a regular basis. But I think the difference that comes through for me for people who take part in workshops is when you've made it something different, when you've added this creative touch to it. And what happens is that people come out of it in a different way, and they often, have really, really good memories of it. So how did I get there? This is my creativity kit in my office. There are loads and lots of different things, and I've been building it myself, for over the last 10 years. There's some classic kit, as you can see on the left. There's post-its, there's lots of Sharpies and pens, but also have music instruments. I've got different hats. I've got a collection of Playmobiles. I've got loads of Lego kits these days, which I will be talking about, and lots of cards, lots of visuals, and lots of all sorts of different things that I've come across or I've had the idea of. It's really up to you to start building your own kit, although there are some essentials, I would say, that you need. And really, when I don't have anything and I'm doing it abroad and I don't have time to have any kit with me, all I need is masking tape. Wherever you go, don't use any blue tack or anything. People will, when you work in hotels or conference rooms, people will be really worried about what you're using. Masking tape is the safest and the only thing that works for me. It's the same with post-its. Don't go for the cheap version. Really try to invest in the 3Ms version, the top, the ones that stick. And Sharpies. I think that would probably be the other thing that I would say is essential. Sharpies are these special pens that you can see. I think I've got a picture somewhere. At some point I can show you again, and I will talk about them again. Sharpies are the ones that are going to be helping people to write legibly on post-its, and you can actually see, what people have written from far away. So when you're looking at clustering post-its, these are kind of the things that are really important. So post-its, Sharpies, and masking tape. And I'll say maybe sticky dots and things like that can come later on, according to the activities, according to the kind of creative workshop that you're doing. What I like to take you through is a kind of typical workshop structure. What kind of things that I would typically do, kind of more systematically, I would say, regardless of my objectives. The first one I will, what I'm going to do in this presentation is go through each, one by one. So there's obviously the welcome. I review the objectives, and then I review the roles that we're all going to be playing in the workshop. I explore hopes and fears, and sometimes out of it we kind of look at a pledge or have prepared a pledge before. I'll talk about that in more detail. Sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. And then I will be doing some form of training. And I think this is the thing that people often skip or not aware of. But, if you are wanting to help people generate new ideas or create a new vision or strategize with some kind of creative flair, then you really need to warm them up towards it. And what I find is not just getting the creative mindset in, but it's also getting them to collaborate together in ways that maybe they're not used to. So I will look at that too. Then what happens, I start my day. I will show you an example of a workshop plan, just to give you an idea of what I used. Then I move into my activities. My activities are related to my objectives, the objectives set for the workshop. And I will then use specific processes, methods, tools, and techniques. This is when they come in, and I'll talk about some of them. Obviously, this is a taster. I mean, this would probably take days, to cover everything. I always use team builders in the morning, and I always use energizers in the afternoon. Again, I will give you an example of the kind of things I might do. There's lots of books about each, and this is not really the purpose of today to go into details about those, but I can direct you if you need any help afterwards. And then I get some sense of closure for everyone, and I get the feedback. And that would be probably for me the kind of typical workshop structure that I would work around, you know, to set it all up. So the first thing is welcome, and you know, you might find that kind of a little silly, but actually this is really the most important part. I've arrived probably 1 or 2 hours beforehand. I've covered my walls with paper because I usually use a lot of wall space, so I've got rolls of paper that I use, or flip chart paper, it doesn't matter, but you need help. You can't really do this on your own. And I'm ready. I've got music on, or most of the time I play music, you know, for people when they arrive. And I'm ready to welcome them, which means something I've learned is to always smile, which is kind of obvious, probably to most of us, but it isn't when you're stressed, you know, getting ready, no rest. But what I found is very powerful is simply shake hands with everyone as they arrive, you know, and in a way that's my way of kind of connecting with them, establishing a physical rapport, which is going to be very important afterwards. And it's not something I would say we necessarily do in a British culture, but it is actually more important in other cultures too. So when you're dealing with cross-cultural teams, as I often do, it's really important to have something that's common to everyone, and shaking hands is a very powerful thing. The next thing is name tags. They may all know each other, which in my experience often they don't, because people move and there are always newcomers in the teams. But I always use name tags, and I get them to make you know, I have lots of little visuals, you know, that they can use, you know, to glue on them. I mean, I have different themes as well that I use. I've got lots of stickers, you know, with different themes that they can kind of inspire themselves from and use to create their name tags. Or I just ask them to draw, and you know, this is the beginning, depending on what I'm trying to do. Even if it's a very serious workshop with very serious objectives, this is quite important for them to decide how they want to represent themselves. You know, obviously their name stays the same, and obviously the name tags are most useful for me, but they are essential for me to work with people throughout the day. Now, the next thing I work on and I talk about with them is the need for them to be fully present, and that's really looking at getting them to be and nurturing, you know, really openness within themselves, and I'll talk a bit more about that in a minute, and really to encourage them to be focused, which in my experience these days is a real issue. So I often suggest that we keep all the digital gadgets away. I sometimes ask them to put them away with a post-it, you know, with their name on it, on so they can find the mobile phone again, or you know, whatever they're using. And then we put them away in the box, you know, for the day. That's really kind of dramatic sometimes for people, and it's a commitment. I think it's for them, it's kind of committing to the session, to be there, to be fully present and focused. So when you are setting up a workshop and you've got your people in front of you, you're going to be facing different challenges. And one of the key ones I find is that people come cynical, they come blasé, they come already disillusioned. So it's really kind of helping them overcome the kind of thoughts that will come through their mind. You know, yeah, we've already looked at this before. I can't believe we're doing this again. You know, it didn't work last time. Why are we doing it? You know, it's kind of this sense of not really being there with, you know, using their time, you know, usefully. So for me, it's kind of really enabling them to find some sense of purpose and some sense of hope, I guess. You know, and I guess that's why my little tree is there, so that they see a reason. You know, they really kind of commit themselves to the session. So I take this is a model I've used from a change management process called Theory U. And it's a very useful one because it's really looking at 3 voices that speak in us and prevent us from being our best self, I would say, our best creative self. And the first one is the voice of judgment. So this is the one we always kind of fight against and try to overcome, help people overcome, especially when they getting into an ideation mode. The next one is the voice of cynicism, which I found particularly prominent among men. And I don't want to be sounding sexist here, but you know, if I'm dealing with a cross-cultural team with a lot of Latin people, a lot of Latin men, it's not something that comes naturally to some of them, you know, to actually say how they feel as opposed to what they think. And as we know in creativity, you know, anything to do with innovation, we need to be in touch with our emotions, with our motivations, which are fueled by our emotions. So if we're disconnected from our emotions, that we are unlikely to bring the full of expression of who we are as creative beings. And the last one is fear. I find that a lot of people get fearful. I mean, I ran sessions with bankers a few months ago, and I had a couple of people coming up to me and saying, "Oh my God!" And we were looking at the gifts that each were bringing to the team, and I had people coming up to me and say, "Whoa, I'm not sure I can do this. That is kind of feeling kind of a little scary." So there are different things that you're going to ask people to do that are going to trigger some sources of anxiety, which you need to support. Obviously, you need to help them with throughout the session. So when you set this up, it's like giving them permission to be whoever they are, and really encouraging them to tap into how they feel as well as how they think, which is kind of the more natural way of being for us. So what I do systematically, and that's just one of the exercises I might get them to do immediately, first thing in the morning. I get them to get a piece of paper and a pen and jot down all the things that they currently have on their mind. So I challenge them to, create the longest possible list. And then I ask them to crush it into a little ball and just throw it away from them. And it creates complete chaos, a bit of fun. The energy kind of really rises immediately. It's a good feeling. It's kind of actually becoming aware of all this stuff, the luggage that we're bringing with us. How crowded our mind is when we come to a session like this, to a workshop first thing in the morning, and helping them kind of clear it so they can again bring the best of themselves, their full self, with all of their possible ideas and experiences. So. That would be my welcome, and that would be my warm-up in a way, in kind of getting them to know what I need from them, personally. And what I then do is review the objectives, which I've prepared on the flip chart. And these objectives have been agreed with my client, and I will explain in a minute what I mean by that. Now, what's most important is I find clients will bring me problems like, oh, what we want to do in that session is that, we want to explore what needs to be done differently for us to deliver against our next year's strategic priorities. And this is what they want people to work on. And this is not a creative way of looking at the problem that they have. So what I always do, I do it for clients if they don't want to do it themselves, if they don't feel comfortable doing it, but I reframe their objectives as problem statements. And the key thing about problem statements is that they always start with the stem, how might we, or in what ways might we, the different formulations of it. These are the core ones that I would always use, because what they do is open the problem. They really help people think about the problem openly. What needs to be done differently is kind of narrowing it already, because we don't know whether we need to do things differently per se. It's about how to deliver, how to achieve our objectives next year. How might we achieve our objectives next year? That would be maybe something as simple as this that I would encourage them to use for us to start thinking and ideating, or generating a plan, whatever needs to be done. So the next thing I will do is explain our roles. And what's really important about creative facilitation, it's not like qualitative moderation where I say, okay, we bring the neutrality and objectivity to it, but we are somehow manipulating the process so that we get specific information that's agreed with our clients. And what happens when we're doing creative facilitation, and I see it as every time I've seen it when I participate in other people's projects, is you cannot mix process and content as a creative facilitator. So when I facilitate, I don't really care what the content is. I mean, obviously I'm listening, and I will redirect people if necessary, or I will get them to reframe it if necessary. But the content is none of my business in many ways. It's my client's business. So I will always have among the client team someone I will report to, check in with within the group that I'm working with, and we explain this. So Norma is going to be my client today, and you guys, the rest of the people participating in the session, will be our resource group. So we'll be relying on you to produce the content, to generate the ideas, to get the plan sorted. Whatever you are there to contribute and produce, and we will always check with Norma to see whether we're on track, whether we're meeting our objectives, we will be looking up to her to decide, whether we're doing it right or not. So I'm kind of in between, and I'm in charge of process. I'm in charge of how we're going to do it. I'm not responsible for the outcome per se. So that's a really important differentiation from, I would say, the classic approach to qualitative moderation. So the first thing I will do very early on, I will not teach, but I will kind of remind people. People think they know how to use post-its. In my experience, that there's always going to be some issues. Again, I'm using those Sharpie pens; they're very important. I encourage them to actually ask them, really kind of request that they only use one post-it per idea or per word or per association, whatever they're writing down. What you'll find is people use post-its to write lists, and you can't work with lists. You can't actually facilitate with lists. You need to facilitate with items, and single items. So I just go through the kind of a basic process of using post-its, making sure they write legibly for others to be able to read them. And I also already encourage them to read out everything that they share or contribute. So we don't just collect post-its and put it on the flip chart. Everyone reads out their post-it to everyone else, before it's put on anywhere on the wall or a flip chart. And that's really important for the sharing in terms of helping people hear and understand what people are contributing. The other thing that's really important too is always ask them to write full sentences. If you're generating ideas, it's not just about two words or a phrase. It's about a full sentence explaining, describing what the idea is. And again, it's not a paragraph. It's the full sentence with an action, an action verb, and subject and object. Now, really, as basic as this is going to be what's going to be conditioning your output, the outcome that they're going to be ending up with. So these may seem very simplistic, but they're, in my experience, essentials and set you up for a really good session, because people operate in the same way, and it's effective and productive. Now, hopes and fears is one thing I systematically do, because people come with hopes and people come with concerns, and they have their own sources of anxiety. And what I do, always start with a positive, and they download, and this is a good way to start using post-its together. They download their hopes for the day, and we go through them. We see the overlaps, what happens. I teach them at that point. I kind of train them to work more effectively with them. And then we look at concerns, and I get them to work immediately on how to overcome them. So we often end up with some kind of pledge in terms of how we agree to be together, how we agree to communicate, how we agree to participate, how we agree, what we agree, to finish with. It could be all sorts. It's kind of a set of agreements, and these are, and I play it by ear. Sometimes I do it, sometimes I don't. Sometimes it's not necessary if you've discussed, how you're going to overcome concerns together. And really, doing this is a way to empower them to be in charge of the session, to regulate how they're participating together. And once you've got the post-its, of concerns and how to overcome concerns, or the set of agreements, in terms of how you're going to ensure those concerns are overcome, then you can easily refer to them throughout the day as reminders if necessary. As a facilitator, that's pretty useful to have them in the background. So the next thing would be some kind of training or warming up. This language is a very important thing when you're doing these sessions. You've got to be careful how you're instructing, or inviting is usually a better way of looking at it. People don't like rules, unfortunately. When you're asking people to take part in a creative workshop, then you're asking them to bring their creative self, which is not necessarily natural to them. As we know, when it comes to the brain, I'm sure some of you will know that already, but we're supposed to have a left brain and a right brain that kind of operate differently. Now, the latest research in neuroscience kind of indicates that we have dominance in each side, but both sides are kind of operating, helping us towards the same kind of goals. So the left is a seat of language. The left side of our brain is all about language. It's where we categorize, where we name things, and this is where we're mostly trained in, in terms of schooling, and that's where we get into a thesis, antithesis, synthesis. This is the kind of the rational part of how we we do things, and this is where our brain kind of focuses on clear conclusions and likes to check things and know things and look for proofs and evidence. On the right-hand side, the dominance is all about visuals, about seeing the big picture. What happens also when we are using our right-hand side brain is that we are very much more living in the present, and this is where non-judgment, which is so key for creative thinking, comes in. We don't judge, we're just really very open, we live in the present, and we welcome and embrace ambiguity, uncertainty, the unknown, I would say, in general. So this is quite interesting to remember when we're looking at creative thinking, is that this is where we need to rebalance how we use our brain and make sure that we use both sides effectively when we take part in those in workshops like this. So I go through this, you know, I will remind them, you know, this is why we're doing this. This is why we're asking you to tap into your emotions, that we're asking you to embrace the unknown and uncertainties, as we will see later on. Next thing I often do is I use a lot of Lego kits these days. I got certified in Lego Serious Play, which I'll tell you about later on today. And I get them to build a duck with sets of Lego kits. And this is a great leveler in terms of how each of us is creative. We're all creative at birth. We just differ in the way we like to express ourselves creatively. So there's a very, very famous knot, but it's something that's very memorable, you know, in terms of my experiences, in terms of my the kind of work I've done. I trained emergency cardiologists in creative thinking, and it was amazing to see that, you know, within 2 weeks we had poets, we had songwriters, we had comic strip drawers. It was just extraordinary to see how people were able to tap into who they were initially as creative beings, I would say, which is great. You know, once you get into the session, that then everyone can bring their own way of looking at life and their own perspective in terms of creative perspectives. Now, there are lots of different assessments, and sometimes I use them when we have, that's part of the program. I encourage you to look at it if you're interested. The one that I recommend at the moment is either KAI or Foresight, and it will give you a sense of what kind of creative thinker you are. So it's quite interesting to know for a team and understand others better when you understand that, you know, the main focus is on implementation. So that's why they always want to do things. They never want to take the time to develop or reflect or ask questions like clarifiers would do. So that's something that you might want to consider when you're running creative workshops. It's including some sense of understanding of who people are as creative thinkers. So how might we be more creative? I do a bit of training in terms of that, bit of warm-up. I always ask people to prepare, by the way. There's always some form of homework or preparation that lead them to reflect on who they are as creative beings. And then, you know, I work on different sets. This is a model I've created after I did a master with the Center of Creative Studies in New York State University. And this is the original center, which was created about 50 or 60 years ago, the first center of creative studies. And really, out of all these things, and I'm not going to go through all of them, I focus on two or three. The first one is positivity. So and each of these things are covered through exercises, very quick, brief, you know, dynamics, very dynamic, very energetic exercises. So I will get them to nurture positivity through a party exercise that I have, so they get the experience of saying no or saying but. You know, but is the word that we're fighting really to get people to be creative, and replace it with yes and. You know, it's just a little practice. It's just a little tip, and you can apply it in your normal life. It will change some of your relationships, actually. The next thing I focus on is non-judgment. So really helping people not judge immediately. This is the issue with creativity, is that we tend to not allow ourselves to be creative because we evaluate or judge immediately the kind of ideas that we have. So, you know, I work with this visual in particular and get them to feedback, you know, and you know, although I've asked them to consider suspending judgment, most of the feedback I get immediately are negative comments. So it's becoming aware how we kind of train to evaluate and be critical, you know, to have this critical judgment coming in immediately. And the last thing I would say I work on is agreeing to disagree. This is one of the aspects, especially when you're working in the corporate world, where you know this hierarchy. There are lots of things conditioning people in not helping them express themselves. So that's the other thing I work on through different exercises. And really the goal is to get to the bottom of this, you know, and get really people to collaborate and be and share together in a way that's effective and productive. The other thing that we face, and that's something I've worked on a lot over the last 10 years, I've become very passionate about dialogue methods. We use the same words with different meanings, and that's something we're very familiar with in qualitative research. So it's really handling that challenge and helping people overcome this need for debate and discussion. When we're doing a creative workshop, we're really looking at getting to complete openness, getting to the fifth level here on this model. And that's where dialogue comes in. It's when people feel safe enough to express their emotions and to share completely and openly. So going beyond opinions, going beyond the facts, which are part of that process. But, you know, ultimately, we want to get into dialogue in the dialogue format. So what I do is I do deep listening exercise before I move into any kind of creative sessions. And this is a group of engineers I worked with in Val d'Isère last year. Where, you know, they kind of learned, and that's the beginning. They start with a deep listening exercise, and I'll explain later on, and I kind of build it up. You know, I use different methods to get them to the group level where they can start listening to each other properly and really generate and produce together properly. So I always have a work planned, and as you can see, it's pretty detailed, and that's just an example. It's a blank example, but just to give you a sense, sometimes I have a column, so I'll have the times, the activities, what these activities are, and often I have an additional column with the objective it's going to meet and who is doing what. I most often work with other people, with visualizers or just runners, backroom runners. You know, you have to decide what you need. In my experience, it's very difficult to facilitate a large session on your own. I mean, I can run sessions up to 20, 25 on my own, but I run very large events, sometimes up to 70, 80 people, and this is where you need to be, you know, you have to have at least 2 other people. Especially a timekeeper is very useful to have. Time is always of the essence, as it is today, so I need to move on. So I use different processes, different models, but this is the one that's influencing me the most these days, and it's CPS. It's Creative Problem Solving Process, which was created by an academic and an advertiser. Osborne Barnes is the academic and Osborne is the advertiser, and Osborne is the O in BBDO. So it's, you know, I love this model because it's originating from the real world as well as the thinking world. That's my way of looking at it. And it's mostly 3 phases, 3 stages that I use, you know, to look at what kind of problem I'm presented with to solve, you know, in the creative workshop that I'm being asked to run. And what I found is I've been able to map the kind of different things we might do as researchers or co-creators, or, you know, we're using all sorts of different words. So that's just one way to look at these things in terms of and understanding what the needs are, you know, from the workshop. I also use it fully sometimes when people have a problem and they don't have any, you know, any information about it. So we start with the exploration phase. So I'm still a researcher, you know, in my world. It's not something I've excluded at all, but I've just integrated, you know, some of the skills and some of the knowledge that I had from research to expand it, so I can serve clients, you know, and help them then generate ideas, and then we can evaluate the ideas, and then we can get into action planning. So the key thing about these things is always to help people understand that they need to separate the 2 ways of thinking. When we're generating ideas, we're in divergent mode, and when we're choosing ideas, we're in convergent mode. And it's always separate those moments. So always allow for generation of ideas and then stop, you know, prevent people from converging whilst they're diverging. This is the challenge, because that's where people get into debate. That's the key essence really here of making it work for people to be creative. Dialogue methods and tools, as I said, that's something that's really close to my heart these days, and it's very, very powerful ways of dealing with this. I've used mostly those approaches. The Visual Explorer I'll talk about in a minute. Legacy is play. the World Cafe approach, and circle work, which, you know, it's just basically having people in a circle, but you can't really get to that stage without some kind of progression, I would say, because it looks like therapy to quite a few people, and it's not what we do. You know, group therapy is obviously not relevant here. So you want to avoid that kind of association. So, you know, they might have done a deep listening exercise as a pair, and I will get them to work through the different methods one by one. The purpose really is for them to be fully present, to be really there, attentive when they're listening, but also to feel safe enough to be vulnerable, because when we talk about feelings, then people might, you know, share to a level where they may be sensitive. And Visual Explorer is a visual of visuals. That's how I would start, and it's very useful to use them as in trios. As I've just been to a conference a couple of weeks ago, and we use them in trios here, and this is the beginning of dialogue, of sharing in a dialogue format. Lego Serious Play, I used to use Lego bricks in a very naive way for many years, and I got certified in Lego Serious Play in Copenhagen last year, and it's probably one of the best things I've done. It's basically has professional kits designed for professionals, but I use them with everyone, you know, whether they users, consumers, CEOs, bankers, engineers, everyone loves them. And you can do you can do literally anything with those. And why they're powerful, those bricks, is mostly because you're working with stories. It's all about storytelling and metaphors, and it's just so easy for people to get into it and share at a very deep, meaningful level. In a playful way. And that's the great thing about Lego bricks. It just brings the playfulness, you know, in creative thinking. One of the things I use a lot as well is World Cafe, because it brings up to you know, if I've used, you know, deep listening exercise in pairs, then Visual Explorer in threes, then I move to the World Cafe in fours, and then I would get to the circle work if necessary. I get, you know, if the group is small enough, then we'll get work to work and share in a circle. And this is a process that's very powerful and useful whenever you are doing any kind of workshop. It's something to consider, and it really builds people up to really being creative and collaborative in ways that's kind of not normal, but kind of takes them where you need you need them to be, to generate ideas or start thinking strategically or envisioning the future. So I'm not going to go into details, because I have about 5 minutes left. And the one thing I will simply talk about is that there are different types. There's lots of tools and techniques when it comes to ID generation. And I want to talk about that because that's often the one thing that people need the most or ask me about when we do training. And I see them as three categories. There's the ones that help you explore. So you've got guided visualizations, you've got free associations, the kind of things we're more familiar with, you know, in qualitative research. And then it's about combining things. So we've got different techniques such as mind mapping or force connection, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then it's about transforming. It's a category where we're transforming things. So this is where improvisation is useful, improvisation games, or Scamper, which I will briefly mention too. So not to forget that we don't no longer write people's ideas. They write their own ideas on their post-its, one per post-its. And our role as a facilitator is to basically handle post-its, and that's really important, because I still see people wanting to chart things, and that's just crazy, really. You just can't write what people are saying as they're saying it on a flip chart. You just need to get them to write it down, and then, you know, use it, then cluster it, or, you know, use it on a flip chart yourself as a facilitator. And that's a tip, you know, for qualitative work as well. That's something that's quite useful. Mind maps, you can use mind maps and then post-its, so different ways of looking at things. This is where people are starting to explore, combine, and then force connection is a very classic tool to encourage people to have fresh ideas, new kind of ideas. And we basically use a random item like a vase, a glass vase, and then we get them to list attributes, you know, or descriptors. And then we ask them to force a connection between an attribute and the challenge that they have, the problem that they're trying to solve. And they really often bring some very, it's quite, you need to train people into it, but it's a very powerful tools for ID generation. And the other one that's more about, kind of fits within a transformational category, is Scamper, which is the acronym for substitute, combine, adapt, modify, put to other users, eliminate, and rearrange. And there, just give you an example, it's really kind of looking at ways to create new ideas from ideas you already have, or things that exist already in the world. It's just an example from the world of food. So, adapt chops to a American in origin. It's not Chinese, but you could have a pizza. I was thinking about pizza in this context. So substitute the meat for use tofu instead of meat. So you have vegetarian pizza maybe. This is way kind of looking. This is not just give you ideas in terms of how to help people think differently. The other thing I should have said is there's not just CPS for creativity. There are 4 main routes into creative thinking, but CPS is my base. There's also de Bono lateral thinking, and you can use the thinking hats. You could use the different techniques, and I incorporate, from other routes. The third route is synectics, which is mostly metaphor-based, but as qualitative research, I think researchers were kind of used to using metaphors, and that's something that comes naturally as well, I think, when you move into creative facilitation. And the fourth one is a much more sophisticated process, which is called TRIZ, which is used much more in the engineering world. So it's using contradictions and oppositions, which I personally don't use at all. You need to be trained in it, and it's pretty sophisticated. So just to give some background, to why I'm focusing on CPS and how I've kind of integrated things that I felt have worked well. Metaphors, obviously, we know work well when people are trained in producing them. So, as I said, I'm not going to go into details, but one of the team builders I would use in the morning is get the team to create a postcard. I have different pieces of music, and I stop the music. They stop drawing, and they give their card to the next person on the left. So they start contributing to other people's cards, and then once you've finished, you've done one round or a couple of rounds, then they end up with their original postcard where people have contributed on it. It's very powerful. Technique to use when you're actually working with creative teams. Creative teams, creative individuals are often single-minded, so it's good for them to start realizing other people can contribute, can build on their ideas, and they can do so as well. So it's the idea of helping people build on each other's contribution. Rather than evaluate and judge it immediately, which is always the challenge. In terms of energizers, one of the things I often use is a set of cards from a book called Zoom. And it's less energizers about getting people on their feet, getting back in their body. So I use nature, I get them to go outside. We could do trust walks with blindfolds. We could do lots of different things. And this one is easy because you can do it indoors. It's a set of cards. Everyone gets 2 or 3 cards. They can't show their cards, but as a team, they've got to decide what the story is all about without showing their cards. So they can describe them, they can talk about them, but they cannot show them. It's a wonderful exercise that really get them into working together and having a bit of laugh and really understanding each other in terms of how they're being led or how they like to lead themselves to. So it's got lots of different dimensions, but as an energizer, it's wonderful because it just gets people, as I said, on their feet and just to do things together physically. Okay, so I'm getting close to the end, and I always have a closure exercise, and it's mostly usually focusing on appreciation. So we have different forms of different invitations towards that. It's just in making sure that people reflect in a positive way and see what they may be grateful for from the time that they've had together. In terms of feedback, in my experience, it's best to get it immediately. I mean, you still get the evaluation form if you wish to, but in my experience, you're going to get the best feedback immediately on Post-it. So I create a space on the wall somewhere, and I have an area where they can write one Post-it for what they've enjoyed most, one Post-it for what they would have liked more of, or one Post-it for what they would have liked less of. And just give some kind of rating through happy faces, so kind of some face. Usually you get either sad, neutral, or happy. And it's immediate. I'm not there when they're doing it, so they know I'm not there to check, who's putting what. So it's still pretty accurate in general, in terms of what the feeling has been. And that's about it for me. So hopefully, at the end of your workshop, I'm giving you some ideas to, for your next workshops and how you might make it more creative in terms of event, how you might become a more creative event so that it's welcoming, friendly, informal, inclusive, playful, productive, creative, effective, collaborative, immersive, insightful, and purposeful. These are all the key dimensions for me for a great workshop, for a great creative workshop. So I'm very happy to respond. Obviously, we're going to have some questions now, but I'm very happy to help anyone. If you have any more need for information, this is my email address. And the other thing that I've been talking about is I'm very interested in running a couple of days training for ICG, and that would be a special rate of £125 per day. And depending on how many of you may be interested, that's something I'd be very happy to do, and really giving you a sense, for the Thursday to look at the creative mindset, and maybe you can take the full site assessment for yourself as well. And on the second day, looking more about ways to use CPS and mostly making it more relevant for you as researchers or as workshop facilitators, whatever you need to be doing. This is the kind of work I've been moving towards, is really integrating where I come from as a qualitative researcher and seeing how I might help through creative facilitation. So it's just something that I've been invited to offer if anyone is interested. And again, just get in touch. This is my email and my telephone number.
Well, it's not a question, it's a comment. This is from Keith Hewitt, who says that he's a fan of 3M flip chart paper, which means write, then stick on walls, shows team achievement.
Okay, so I just one comment is that they're shorter, they're smaller. So for me, it's quite limiting in terms of space. In my experience, those flip charts, they're great. We use them as well, especially for people to work in teams. At each table, they can have their own flip chart, their 3M flip chart. It's useful. I just prefer to use masking tape in general. I find that the 3Ms, you can't guarantee what they're going to do to the wall paint, whatever you're working with in terms of surface. I mean, one of the clients I've worked with is Disney, and they've got these fabulously painted rooms. You've got to be absolutely super safe in terms of what you're using. So that's the only comment I have.
So what's your super safe tip then for sticking things on walls? Because sure, we all do it from time to time.
Masking tape.
Masking tape. Okay, yeah, sure. Yeah. Sure. Okay.
Just pretend you're a painter.
Okay, here's a question from Muriel Esposito. She says, I'm looking to run some co-creation sessions with creative customers and clients in the same room, and this is on food development. So she asks, what are your tips on recruiting creative consumers and any watch outs as regards having clients and consumers in the same room?
So there's a whole area that I haven't really looked at and tapped into here. I use specific screeners that I've developed over the years now with different kind of innovation companies I've worked with. So that's not an easy answer to provide. Basically, there are lots of dimensions that you need to look at, and I think the dimensions, the parameters we're using in our screening, kind of reflect some of the things I've been talking about in this talk. So that's the first thing, that we do screen and recruit consumers and users very carefully, and it's not just I mean, I made some contributions as well. I think some of the recently on the e-group, it's a big subject. I can't just send you my screener because that's the outcome of, but I can help you build one, focusing on some of the areas that you're looking for. Because what I find is I will modify it according to the kind of people I'm looking for and the kind of, obviously, the objectives that you have. The next part of the question is about how to get people to co-create together when they're users and clients, right? And I find one of the key rules is to really always pair people. So it's like if you can have the same number of users and same number of clients, and to make sure that clients don't, there are no more clients than users. And then I will get them to work. I will do a deep listening exercise. I will get them to collaborate through different exercises up front, and then we move into the thick of things and get them to work on what they need to be working on. Because then they know one another. They hopefully like one another. They feel they can be open and share together and really work collaboratively together. I always also brief clients. There's always a briefing session to clients in terms of how to, and usually in my experience is to help them overcome their fears. I find most clients are actually pretty scared of talking to their own customers. So it's really helping them, giving them the tools, open-ended questioning if you really feel they need to ask any questions. Most of the time, it's about listening. It's about getting them to listen to their customers, and to when you want them to work collaboratively with their customers, it's just to be open. Again, it's about openness. It's to be open-minded and open-hearted. in their approach with them. I mean, I know that's not answering the question, Muriel, is not helping you probably immediately, you know, but I'm very happy for you to contact me. We can have a chat on the phone.
Okay, great, thank you. I've got another question here from Jane Woolley, who I think has probably just left us now. She said she'd like to hear you speak in more detail about the Lego thing, Lego Serious Play, and the World Cafe thing, wanting to know what involves them. Now, Lego Serious Play, I know, is a very big subject. Would you mind just telling us a little bit about World Cafe?
Lego Serious Play, they just need to Google it, and then you'll get all sorts of information about it. And again, she can call me, and I'll take her through the details. World Cafe has been invented in America and California. I don't know when, by Juanita Brown and what's his name? I've got all these books around here. It's Juanita Brown and Isaacs. Yeah, Bill Isaacs. And they've used it for community work initially, and then it kind of spread around the world, and obviously went into the corporate world pretty quickly. And it's mostly getting people to work in tables of 4. And the principle is that they're going to share around in a dialogue format. So we always have a talking piece in the middle. We also encourage people to doodle and draw and write down whatever they're thinking whilst they're listening to everybody else. And so the sharing is in turn in a dialogue format. And then what happens after the first round, you obviously have themes or questions that you're asking them to reflect on or share about. And then after the first round, you ask half the table to move to another table. So what happens is you start mixing people at different tables. And once they meet again at the beginning of the second round, then what happens is they will start downloading what was shared in the first round. And it brings up the reflection, the discussion at a much more conceptual level. It's a much more meaningful level, I would say. And people can start identifying patterns and what they share in common more easily. And you do a few rounds of that, as many as you need, really. And you can throw new questions as well, you know, as you're using it. So I hope that helps a little.
Yes, thank you. I've got quite a few messages of thanks. Really useful. Thank you, Caroline, from Debbie Khan. Thanks to Caroline from Keith Hewitt. From Natalie Rowland, she says, Caroline, that was brilliant. So rich with content and also practical examples. And I can only but agree. She's curious to know more about how you establish the roles. Does this happen prior to the workshop or as a part of it? A very interesting distinction you make between being in charge of how we do things versus meeting objectives.
Yeah, so it's interesting, isn't it? Yes, I do. I explain those roles to my clients, and we agree before the sessions who my clients are going to be. And most of the time, it's more than one person. Most of the time, it's 2 or 3 people I will be reporting to in terms of the content. And I explain those roles, you know. And we've agreed those roles beforehand, and we re-explain them and re-agree them with the whole group on that day. So that's really, it's a very important process.
Okay. Now you partially answered this question. This is about the creativity of the participants, and I guess this particularly relates to consumers. You said that you've developed a screening procedure, but this question comes from Tessa Weaver, who says, "Is it necessary to recruit for creativity?"
Well, there's 2 things, 2 choices. You can either not and just recruit anyone, but you're going to need to train them. And by training, it's like waking people up to their creative selves. That's all it needs, really, because we are all creative. This is the basis that we know. You know, we all have some creative potential, but most of us have grown up feeling or thinking that, you know, we're not. And that's kind of the common attitude towards creativity in the Western world. So it's really, there's 2 choices, and I find, you know, if you can screen or recruit for some, and sometimes that's what we do a mix, and just have a random normal recruitment, but make sure that you have some time for training. I have some of the work I've done. We often train, and I use training in a very loosely. It's not about training. It's more about, as I said, waking up people to their creative self. We do the training a week before the session, so they've got time to incorporate and understand, you know, the kind of things that we're trying to awaken them, and give them some preparation, some homework before the actual ideation session. So, and then we've established rapport. So by the time they turn up the week later for the ideation session, you know, we already know one another. They know the rules of the game in that way, and they let themselves go. You know, they're recommitting to really kind of bringing the best of themselves. I find that the training or the kind of, it's a new word I'm using today, waking up, you know, to your creative self is the most important, regardless whether you screen them or not. You know, I mean, I'm used to working with anyone. Sometimes you don't get the chance, you know, to screen the kind of clients you're going to be working with, and it's the same with users and consumers.
I just wanted to cover a couple more things before we get to the witching hour at 12 o'clock. This is from Judy Bartowiak. Hi, Judy. She says, thank you, so interesting, really want to know more. Would love to use some of these ideas with my kids groups. Now, Judy, I know, specialises in working with kids. How do some of these techniques work with kids? One would assume that they really will take to them and they don't have the inhibitions that adults do.
Yeah, I mean, it's the kids can't share though in a dialogue format. It's pretty difficult for kids to listen to one another. That's the one thing. But my first intuition really is that the Lego would work really well with anyone, with any age. I mean, I've used them with students. I've used them with I haven't really used them with kids. That's not something I've done or I've had the opportunity to do. And I think I sense it would be very easy for kids to. It would be a very powerful way for kids to share how they feel about things or what they envision or what they experience through just constructing models that they can share in a dialogue format. And that would be easy to put in place, you know, just to ask them not to comment or just to say a nice thing at the end, you know, just to make sure that the kids can really feel they can share why they've done this and why they've constructed this and what it means to them. Just creating the story. You know, every kid is a good storyteller, and I think Judy will know that. So it's using the Lego more as a medium for kind of leveraging the storytelling potential.
Great. Final question, and I think this is relevant to any of us who've, well, it's not just creative work, but almost any sort of research. And this is from Carol Wright-Attar. She says, how can you help the organisation move on after the workshop and take the outputs forwards?
Okay, so a full workshop will always have some, you know, the end stage of the CPS process that I use always has action planning. And I'm amazed how many people don't actually know about action planning. I mean, most people in the corporate world do or say they do. And there's some dimensions to action planning. There's motivation, there's accountability, there's imagination. There's lots of different parameters I will use and encourage people to use to create their own action planning. And it's something that's done collectively, and again, in a dialogue format, preferably. But accountability, imagination, and in a sense, you know, always putting sense of celebration. So there's lots of different dimensions I would use that ensure that even if they miss the deadline, they have a system, they have a process in place whereby they can readjust and retime things. You know, because this is the issue really in the corporate world, in the organization, where things happen. The future is so unpredictable that, you know, we just have to readjust and replan on a regular basis. And it's really helping them with that, teaching them to have that flexibility and giving them the tools through, you know, I would say, a well-structured but loose action planning process.
That's fantastic. I've just got a couple more notes of thanks for you. That was an excellent talk, very stimulating. Thanks, Caroline. That's from Catherine Passerieu. And thank you so much, Caroline. Your enthusiasm and experience are really infectious, and that's from Alison Drury. So I just want to remind you that the next webinar is on 14th of May, and it's all about conducting multilingual research. So look forward to seeing you then. This webinar will be, a recording of this webinar will be placed on the ICG website via the YouTube link. So that will be available to anyone. I will also post the details through our e-group of Caroline's proposed workshop. So if you're interested in getting involved in that, then you can contact Caroline directly. Caroline, thanks very much indeed. You really did pack a lot in, and we really appreciate you spending the time preparing and delivering that for us. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you, Arthur. I loved it. As I said, I always love talking about that kind of thing. Thank you so much for asking me.
And goodbye, everybody. See you next time.